Why is it that Christians don't understand, well, much of anything? They have a narrative running through their heads that they never think to verify, mostly because I think they know somewhere deep inside that it's all nonsense. But it is emotionally comforting, and that's really all they care about. That's why they won't talk to anyone who will take the piss out of their theology. You know, like me. So, I don't know if you're aware or not, but Greg Koukl, one of those lunatics over at STR, he has a podcast, and he's no more intelligent on his podcast than he is in any video for STR. This time out, he's going to talk about rights and show that he has no more clue about that than he does about anything else. Because, as we all know, these people just aren't rational or intelligent or anything else when it comes to their assertions. They just want to believe. So let's get going and watch Greg blow it all once again.
To be really relevant in crafting a Christian view, we should start with exactly those things that people are asking about. For example, there's an unprecedented number of movements these days for rights, for equality, for freedom, and yet the dominant worldviews of our day, as we have seen, deny the reality of freedom. They give no basis for rights or dignity.
And, of course, they're going to go on to claim that all of this must have come from Christianity, which is completely indefensible. Over the course of this, I'm going to go into where rights actually come from, and spoiler alert, it isn't Greg's imaginary friend. Because the religious, almost entirely, have a very poor view of humanity in general. I've said this before, but the religious, especially those religious who fall under the Abrahamic traditions, they've got a whole lot of self-loathing going on. They seem to think we're hopeless and helpless without some magical father figure in the sky watching over us and telling us what to do. Because, as I keep saying, these people are children, and they're just projecting. But let's see what Greg has to say.
So where did the idea of equal rights even come from? You know, back in the 19th century, Friedrich Nietzsche said it came from Christianity. He said it comes from the concept of the equality of all souls before God, and that this was really the origin of all theories of equal rights.
Right.
Except all of those things existed long before Christianity did. And in fact, if you look at the history of Christianity, the idea of equal rights for all simply didn't exist. At least not until the Enlightenment, when Christianity was dragged kicking and screaming into the modern world. And for a lot of other things, long afterwards. There are Christian groups out there right now still fighting against equality for gay people and trans people, etc., etc., etc. Christians have always viewed equality as something reserved only for Christians. Christians don't actually think anybody else is as good as they are. And when you think about it, it's usually only Christians who believe exactly like they do. It's not universal by any means. They don't understand what universal equality actually is. It's why so many religiously motivated states wrote restrictions against atheism into their state constitutions. Because who the hell cares about equality, right?
The contemporary atheist, Richard Rorty, also said the same thing. He said the idea of universal human rights was completely novel, and is completely novel historically speaking, and that it rested on the biblical teaching that we are all created in the image of God.
And you see that in our founding documents are just explicit with that, which is nice.
The only document which says anything of the sort is the Declaration of Independence, which has no legal standing whatsoever. They also never said a thing about Christianity, instead using generic terms to appeal to the widest possible audience of the day. It was an attempt to get people to sign on to the idea of the new fledgling nation, and religion, whether anyone likes it or not, is really good at getting compliance in the name of imaginary friends. It's why the religious usually trotted priests out at the head of an army to tell the soldiers who were about to die that God wanted them to do it. But as I pointed out before, just because that's how it happened in history, that doesn't mean that's how it had to happen. History is a single data point. It is not an unchanging path to inevitability. It didn't have to be that way. But let's move on.
Yeah. Exactly. What I like about the Rorty quote is then he goes on to say, that he realized he's a Darwinist, he's an atheist, he's an evolutionist, and he said, I realize in the Darwinian worldview there is no basis for human rights.
Sorry, but I don't buy that at all. And I love how she's saying he's a Darwinist, he's an atheist, he's an evolutionist, when only one of those is actually a thing. The religious just love to make up words, don't they? But the fact is, she's wrong, and that's not really a surprise. There are good, non-religious reasons for universal equality, and it comes down to the functioning of human society. We are, by our very nature, social animals. We require other humans to survive, especially in the modern technical age. You can't conceivably learn everything that you need to know, nor are there enough hours in the day to start from nothing and produce everything that modern humans rely on for yourself. You need skilled workers. You need trained workers. You need people who are educated to make modern society operate. How do you get that without everyone having an equal stake in the success of your society? Especially in a consumerist society like we have. You only harm the financial success of the community if you artificially hold some groups back from fully participating. But we'll continue on with that in a second.
Because in the struggle for existence, the strong win and the weak are left behind.
That's right.
And so he says, where do I get the concept of human rights?
Yeah.
I'm happy to reach over and borrow it from our Judeo-Christian heritage.
Yeah, this is just convenient recollection. For the majority of Christian history, they had no concept of equality whatsoever. And for many Christian groups today, they still don't. We just have to look back at 2015 to see just how many Christians were, and let's be honest, still are, fighting against the idea of equal marriage rights for gays. Yet the second they lose, and the religious almost always lose anymore, they twist that loss into a claim that they were right all along. They were on the right side of history, even though they demonstrably weren't. Like nobody has a way to look back and see what they were really saying. This is religious hypocrisy writ large. There is no equality in religion. The Bible is full of calls to subjugate or mass murder others because they're not equal. I mean, Judaism is based on the belief that they are God's chosen people. How equal is that?
And he calls himself a freeloading atheist.
Yeah, well, they are all that in some measure, because in order for them to maintain their genuine humanity, they are going to have to step out of their worldview and take things from our worldview. And this is a great example of that.
I don't want anything out of your worldview, Greg. I think your worldview is fucking stupid. As with most things, he's just cherry-picking the parts he wants to celebrate and shoving the rest under the rug. There's an awful lot in Christianity and Christian history to be ashamed of, and people like Greg, they just ignore those parts and pretend they never happened. Again, they don't want to talk to us about these things because we just point out the horrors of Christianity and the inequality that is part and parcel with his beliefs. People like Greg like to pretend that what he believes today is indicative of what all Christians have always believed throughout history, and that simply isn't true. The American slave trade was based almost entirely on Christianity. That was really equal, right? So was racism against a bunch of different groups. The KKK was and is self-described as a Christian organization. So was Nazism. In fact, just about every single racist group out there, at least the ones that I've ever seen, they're all highly religious. I don't know that I've ever run into a single racist in my life that didn't believe it because he didn't think God made him superior. So, equality, that's bullshit, Greg. Total bullshit.
I think people don't realize that all rights claims are moral claims. They are claims about how we ought to behave towards other creatures who have intrinsic value. None of these notions, objective morality, intrinsic value, human rights, have any foundation of any sort in a materialistic or naturalistic worldview, as Rorty has pointed out.
Even more bullshit. It works just fine from a purely utilitarian perspective. If we just want humanity to survive and thrive, which is just basic evolutionary biology, then equality across the board just makes sense. The more people working for the common good, the better the rate of success will be. In fact, it's hard to come up with an argument against equal treatment for all without bringing religion into the mix, because it's religion that's mostly to blame for dividing people. It's religion that has an us versus them mentality. It's the believers versus the heretics. It's one denomination versus another. History has shown that clearly. It's only once you realize that everyone is basically the same, that everyone needs the same things and benefits from the same kind of strong society, that all of that racist, sexist, ridiculous bullshit just goes away. And that's why, once again, it took the decline of religion in the Western world before we started to see real equality getting general public approval. Because religion is no longer in the way. We just have to look at every single major step forward that we've made. And who was against every single step? Let's see. Equality for women, opposed by religion. Equality for blacks, opposed by religion. Equality for gays, opposed by religion. It's never been secular people who were against these things. It's always been religion. Greg is just full of shit.
One of my favorite philosophers these days is John Gray. He's a British philosopher, and I like him only because he's kind of a modern Nietzsche. He really is trying to be totally honest about the implications of materialism. Mm-hmm. And he, too, has said, and this is a quote, he says, "Darwin has shown us that we are animals. So the idea of free will does not come from science. Its origins are in religion, and not just any religion, but the Christian faith that atheists love to rail against."
And rightfully so, because we're looking at the actuality of Christianity, not the cherry-picked fantasy version that Greg and his ilk like to push. They ignore all of the bad parts and only hold up the supposedly good parts, the parts that they've twisted in retrospect once it becomes obvious that Christianity was wrong all along. And to be really honest, I don't think any of those parts were that good to begin with. Because, as I've said before, they've got an agenda. They have books to sell. They have courses to profit from. They want to give talks, paid talks, in front of religious audiences. And that's why they're doing what they're doing. They have an audience to fleece. They may legitimately believe in their message, but they still make a considerable amount of money just passing it along. STR made just under $2 million in 2018, which is the last year that those figures were made public. I have no idea if that includes Greg Koukl's speaking fees, but let's be honest, there's a lot of people out there making their entire living spreading nonsense for the Lord.
So he says any concept of human dignity, any concept of humans having a special status is a secular version of Christianity.
Wait, who said humans were special? Where the hell do you get that? Because humans don't need to be special to be equal. That's just ego, not reality. We can get all of this just looking at nature. If we look at feral cats, we don't see them segregating the black cats from the white cats. It takes a special brand of stupidity to do that, and that was almost always entirely based on religion. The fact is, we're just animals too. We might be smart animals, although in the case of people like Greg, I might debate that, but we ought to be following the same basic rules as any other species on the planet. There are clear examples of morality within the animal kingdom. There is no God required. In a lot of ways, animals are far better than humans are because they aren't burdened with the ability to believe stupid shit and act on it out of ego. We're all better off if we aren't divided. We can argue over the particulars, but equality is the norm, not the exception. It's like Steven Weinberg once said, with or without religion, good people can behave well and bad people can do evil. But for good people to do evil, that takes religion.
So what this means is that there are elements of a Christian worldview that is so compelling and so appealing that even non-Christians keep trying to claim them.
I love
they're all freeloading atheists.
Right.
Anywhere you turn, you'll find this dynamic of freeloading atheists, people who want what only Christianity has to give. And if we focus on those areas, then we will craft an apologetic that's very positive and that focuses on the very things that secular people sense that they need and are reaching out to grab from the Christian perspective.
Yeah, even more bullshit. Now, granted, I've heard that before from ex-Christians who have been raised in the Judeo-Christian dynamic, and sometimes it's really hard to step back and evaluate reality from a purely realistic perspective. When you've been lied to your entire life and told that Christianity is the source of all good, sometimes it's hard to scrape that crap out of your head. The simple fact is, there is nothing good that you can only get from Christianity. Nothing demonstrably true anyhow. It's all just made up nonsense, often stolen by Christians in the first place from those who had come before. And it's only the pervasive nature of religion, like a fungus that just won't go away, that makes people think that religion was responsible, when in reality, it was more often to blame for the problems that it purports to solve. Going back to slavery, for example, a lot of modern Christians claim that it was Christianity that did away with slavery. Yeah, but it was also Christianity that was responsible for it in the first place. Just because the abolitionists could twist their theology to now say, yeah, well, we used to think it was good, now we think it's bad. Any theology that can do that is total absolute bullshit. I don't think you can claim that Christianity was absolutely necessary for abolition. There are purely secular paths to equality, and they work a hell of a lot better than religion does. You can't really get to slavery without claiming God wanted it done, and that's how it's worked throughout history. In fact, every single place where slavery is still a thing today, and there are still a lot, all of them are based on religion. But people like Greg won't bring that part of it up, will they?
By focusing on those, we can show that Christianity is not only true, but also very appealing.
Well, you can't do the former, and the latter is completely irrelevant. This is a marketing campaign, not a demonstration of fact. But that's really what STR is, though, if you notice. It's what most Christian apologetics is. They're not there to convince the non-believers that they're right. They are not following the Great Commission. They have no objective evidence that they can present for anything. They exist to reinforce those that already believe that their beliefs are not in vain. It's just to say, see, we were right all along. And of course, to keep the money rolling in. It's always about the money somewhere. None of these people are working for free out of the goodness of their hearts. They don't have a separate day job to fund their apologetic efforts. This is it, folks. This is what they do to make money. And it's all a scam, just like a lot of other motivational speakers. All they're trying to do is talk people into things that those people are already convinced are true. Pass the collection plate. It's clear that people like Greg aren't going about it honestly either. They are tailoring their message to their audience rather than just telling the whole truth to anyone who will listen. Why? Because they stand to lose money if they were just honest. Their audience would just go somewhere else because their audience is looking to be coddled. It's why I find religious apologetics to be such a pointless exercise. We all know why they're doing it. We can also see the utter lack of honesty behind it. I'm not interested in your feelings, not at all. I care only about your facts. And the fact is, if you have to spin your narrative for a particular paying audience, then you're doing just about everything wrong. Greg Koukl is not impressive. None of them are, but this whole thing is a joke. Not that he cares, because his net worth, as best as I can determine, is somewhere around $5 million. This man is a scam artist. He's found his load of suckers. It's why he's not interested in putting his ideas up against the skeptics, because he knows we'd wipe the walls with his ass. And that's kind of sad, isn't it? Pretty understandable, I suppose, but it's still sad.